Peppa and George were playing hide and seek. Just like always, George chose a cozy spot, a little further than usual. Peppa was walking through an empty hall. The house seemed frozen in time. George was hiding well, too well. Mommy Pig was washing the dishes, but her movements were a bit slowed down.
Mommy, George isn't coming out.
He always plays like that.
Peppa felt the presence of something supernatural. The wardrobe where George was hiding was now closer than before. George was always nearby, but he wasn't here. The game of hide and seek had long since crossed into another realm. Peppa approached the window. There was George. He was outside, looking at Peppa and trying to get her attention. Turning around, Peppa noticed that George was also inside. She went outside. The yard was empty. The grass was pressed down, as if someone had just left. But now, in the window, there was her, the one who hadn't come out. Peppa decided to go back home. The door creaked as if someone was pulling it at the same time she did. Something in the house had changed, like it was shrinking. The wardrobe remained, but it no longer hid anything. Peppa entered the kitchen. George sat with his back to her at the table. He was waiting, but something was wrong. His face was blurred. He whispered, "You lose. The game was over." But had it ever really begun? It was an ordinary day. Peppa saw a new game on Daddy Pig's computer called Coin Collection. She started collecting coins, and everything seemed fun and harmless. At first, Peppa enjoyed the game, but day by day, she became more absorbed and lost track of time. Soon, dark circles appeared under her eyes, and the joy disappeared. One sunny day, Mommy Pig was tidying up toys in the nursery. She hadn't seen Peppa for a while and decided to check on her. Mommy Pig entered the room to turn off the computer, but what she saw shocked her. Peppa was sitting in her chair with wires connected to her head.
Mom, I'm almost at the final level.
Peppa exclaimed, her eyes clouded. Mommy Pig rushed to disconnect the wires, but as soon as she reached for them, Peppa raised her hand. Another wire appeared out of nowhere and plunged into Mommy Pig's neck. Soon she found herself next to Peppa, absorbed in the screen. Meanwhile, George and Daddy Pig were watching a show about Mr. Potato in the living room. George asked where Peppa was. Daddy Pig shrugged. George decided to check what was happening in the room. He entered and saw Peppa and Mama connected to the computer. He stood there, overwhelmed with fear, but before he could do anything, a wire shot into his neck as well. He too fell under the influence of the game. Daddy Pig also grew bored, sitting alone in the room, so he went to call the family for an evening movie. He entered the room and saw that everyone was now playing. Deciding to stop this madness, he turned off the computer. However, the screen still flickered on. Suddenly, a wire shot forward and connected to Daddy Pig's neck. He froze. His eyes clouded over, and he too succumbed to the game. Suddenly, the lights went out. Now the entire family sat on the sofa in the living room with empty eyes. Wires protruded from their necks. The TV flickered ominously, showing a terrible grimace. Peppa and George decided to take a walk in the forest and stumbled upon an old, abandoned house. It looked very gloomy. Broken windows, overgrown bushes, creaky door. Inside, it was dark and cold. Cracked portraits hung on the walls. Their eyes seemed alive. Suddenly, it became dark outside the window. At that moment, a strange woman appeared. The owner of the house. Her face was pale, and her eyes were cold and frightening. She smiled strangely and said,
Welcome. You shouldn't have come here.
Suddenly, she began to change. Her face distorted. Her eyes shone with bright red light, and something black flowed out of them. Peppa tried to run, but the door slammed shut by itself. The demon owner grabbed Peppa and George with her long claws. Their screams disappeared into the darkness. Everything around started to distort. The house's owner dragged the children into her dark basement. Peppa and George were tied up. Their mouths were covered with rags. The owner was boiling something murky in a huge cauldron and muttered,
Soon I will enjoy this.
Peppa turned around and saw Susie and Rebecca. They were also tied up and trembling with fear. Suddenly, a familiar, sinister whisper sounded. The door opened. Standing in the doorway was Evie, with tentacles and a sinister smile. She grabbed the house owner with one of her tentacles and swallowed her with a sinister sound. Afterward, Evie smiled sweetly but continued to radiate horror. The children were scared. They already knew what awaited them. Evie wasn't full yet and was planning to fix that. They stepped out into the rain, but this rain was different. The world around them was empty. A street lamp hummed faintly. Each drop carried darkness within it. A black puddle, like ink, spilled into reality. George leaned over the puddle. Emily grabbed his shoulder, stopping him.
Step back.
It seemed the puddle was fading. A false alarm, but in its reflection atop the raindrops, a black, hooded figure appeared. The group approached a bench. The rain intensified. The longer they stayed in the rain, the deeper the infection spread. A drop landed on Susie. Her hand turned blurry, translucent. Emily screamed, pulling it away. They vanished. Peppa noticed bubbles rising in the old well. Evie began to cry softly. Black liquid dripped from the corner of her mouth. She reached toward the well. Even the little one understood. Something was hiding there. From the puddles lining the path, tendrils slithered out, surrounding Susie and Emily. The darkness didn't just take, it held on. Peppa ran, shielding Evie with an umbrella. Emily broke free, but stumbled. Tendril grabbed her. Her scream echoed everywhere. In the glow of the street lamp stood the Dripper, massive, black droplets trailing down his cloak. He was the soul of this rain. He whispered. Peppa, holding Evie in her arms, approached him, the umbrella raised like a shield. The final question, is it worth fighting, escape, or become the rain? Evie smiled. Peppa and Mom were choosing products from the shelves. Soon they noticed a figure in a dark cloak. Sometimes ordinariness concealed something else. The faceless shopper suddenly turned his head. Smooth gray skin was covered with cracks from which black liquid dripped and red dots flickered. Peppa nudged Mom.
Look.
Instead of the frightening figure, an ordinary shopper smiled and took a can of beans. Peppa approached the exit and looked outside. The cloak of the faceless one flashed in the doorway as he walked away down the street. He had already gone outside. Peppa stepped out onto the square. Among the passers-by, suddenly several faceless ones froze motionless. Gray faces with cracks and red dots flickered in the crowd. The crowd concealed their faces, but they harbored a great secret. One faceless one slowly raised his tentacle-like hand and pointed at Peppa. For a moment, all the passers-by distorted their faces, their skin pale. Cracks filled with black liquid and red dots flared up. Terrified, Peppa spun around and ran into a narrow alleyway. Peppa ran through the tight